my name is Bryce Sinclair. Today is Wednesday, December 26, 2012. I am interviewing my great-grandfather, Staff Sergeant Glenn Widdows. He was in the 17th Airborne Division, served in World War II. My mom, dad, siblings, and friend are here with me too. So, Grandpa, where were you drafted or did you enlist? And were you engaged or married?
I enlisted.
And were you engaged or married, like before you enlisted?
I was living at the time in Cleveland, Ohio.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, why did you join?
Because of the attack on our nation and by the Japanese, and also because Germany declared war against us.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So, why did you pick the service branch you joined?
I thought it was the best for me, being a ground soldier rather than being on the water.
Mm-hmm. So, do you recall your first days in service?
Oh yes, my first days were in a big fort in Indiana,
Mm-hmm.
where we were initially given our uniforms and got ready to go to another spot where we would get training.
Mm-hmm. So what was a typical day like?
Well, the first days, you said?
Yeah.
Well, being the first time to be away from my home, of course, is a little different,
Mm-hmm.
much different, and of course you're living in an altogether different kind of environment.
Mm-hmm.
You got used to it, and you was maybe put on KP duty where you had to wash big pots and pans and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, it wasn't bad. It was nice.
Okay, that's good. So, what did it feel like in your first days of service? Like, were you scared or did you
Well, did I feel like it felt good to know that I would have a part in protecting our freedoms eventually.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me about your boot camp and training experiences?
Well, we had a good training period down in the bayous of Louisiana. They were tough. We did a lot of marching, a lot of strength building, and what you had to be fit so you could be in a fit position to when it was needed, if you had to someday need it.
Mm-hmm. So, how did you train to become a paratrooper? What did you do to train for it?
Well, we went through some more strenuous type of physical training by learning how to engage in jump. We jumped off towers. They had towers made that you could jump off of, and you'd come down and you'd light, and we sort of simulated the way you would happen when you were going out of a plane.
I assume it was harder training than the regular training for people on the ground.
That was done in the basic training, that before the paratroop training. That was, and then that would continue on, of course, as you blended into the paratroops and the glider troops together.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So do you remember any of your instructors?
Yeah, we had some real good instructors. Actually, I was in a company. I was in a company E of the 193rd Airborne Infantry Regiment, and our company commander was a gentleman became Captain Jukes, and we had lieutenants who were executive lieutenant, and then we had platoon. Each platoon had a lieutenant to it, along with the sergeants and corporals and PFCs and privates in the companies.
Hey Grandpa, let me ask you a question. Tell us about a couple of the different people who were in basic training with you. I know there was a couple different individuals you talked to us about before who went through basic training with you. And tell Bryce a little bit about some of the people that you met, that you became friends with in basic training. Because there was, I know the guy from South Bend you told us about, and you told me about before, and who were some of the people that you were in basic training with?
Well, basic training, was with some, I was probably one of the youngest, probably was one of the youngest guys in the company, and after the company was E also, but with the 101st Division. And
So how old were you when, so you were one of the youngest, you were what?
19.
19?
Right.
So how old were some of the other, typically some of the
Well,
other
most of
guys?
them they were the first bunch of draftees, and they were really the best one. They were anywhere from 23 to 29.
So they're a lot older than later in
Oh,
the
yes,
war.
much older, right. But they were, and some, they had a cadre that came to the division too, and they were experienced from another division, and they were old. But I guess I had met up with some real good guys, and of course, one or two of them probably would be the best. We were in tents when we went to Louisiana, and there was 5 of us in a tent. And I suppose those would have been considered the best, my real buddies, and if you might want to call it. We had a guy by the name of Lindsay, who was from West Virginia, and he became a staff sergeant as I did. He got it before I did. And then he went on, and during the battlefield, he got a battlefield commission later on. And this was years later, a year or so later. And then we had another guy by the name of Covis, and his background was, he was a reporter for the South Bend, Indiana Bugle or something like that, and we always kidded him about it. And we had another guy in there by the name of Shettenhelm, and he had worked in a brewery before up in Milwaukee, and he was a great guy. And then we had another guy by the name of Bryce, and he was from West Virginia, and he was just a normal local guy working in a local business or whatever it was around the little town he was in West Virginia. And I think I've covered them all, have I mean myself, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? I guess I got them covered.
Yeah.
But all of those guys were initially, we trained together, and we of course bunked together in our each cots or in the tents that we had in Louisiana. So that was the beginning of a couple of strong central. The only problem was, well, Lindsay went with me on the cadre to train a new division, and each one of them turned out real great. Covis did real well. He went into the intelligence group because he was a pretty sharp guy, and Shettenhelm went into the division headquarters too because he could speak German, and apparently we knew they were going to go to Germany. So, but I think poor old Bryce, he must have stayed with the company, the line company. So those 4 guys were my initial contact of closeness, real closeness, and that's it.
Okay. So, well, obviously you served in World War II. How many years were you overseas?
How many what?
How many years were you overseas?
Years. Well, no, I wasn't over there for years, no. I went over, I spent, 15 months overseas.
Oh.
So I was a year,
So, yeah,
almost a year and a half, right?
Okay, so, where exactly, sorry.
Yeah, let's add to that, Bryce. So tell us how you actually spent a lot of time training in the States, right? So and then so you went through your basic training, and then you actually spent, how many months did you spend in the U.S. During additional training before you ever even went to Europe? It was quite a long time, wasn't it?
It was 30 months.
So you spent 30 months
In the States. So I was very fortunate to do that because I started out with the 101st and then ended up going to the 17th Airborne, and
Okay.
that prolonged my stay.
Wow.
And also prolonged our stay was the fact that we became airborne. We were a regular infantry division, and then we went into becoming airborne, and we either trained to be a paratrooper or trained to be a glider trooper, or both. And in my sense, I was both. I became a glider trooper first, and then later on a paratrooper. And I forgot to mention one other close friend who was in the 101st with me, my friend Howard Higginbottom. And we continued on our friendship later when we come back to service. He was from Ohio, but he lived on a farm, and him and his family grew up, and our family grew up, and he was probably one the closest guy I had in the service. And he came with me and also to the 17th Airborne from the 101st, but I didn't want to leave him out.
Yeah.
I forgot about him. Didn't forget, but
So, where exactly did you go overseas? Like, what countries did you?
well, my first place was that we sailed from Boston Harbor and landed in Liverpool, England, got on a train, and they put us in a camp, Camp Chiselton it was called, and it was tense again in the muggy old cold rainy days of England during, that was in July of '44, okay, right, and we stayed there, right, we were in England then until we went overseas, when we went into we made our next move to go into combat.
So do you remember arriving, and like, what was it like?
Well, arriving in England was a real experience because we in the United States had so much, and we got over there, and I noticed they were emptying garbage cans off of the ship onto the dock, and people were over there scrounging through there for food, pieces of food and that. They knew it was fresh, it wasn't real old stuff, because when we were out to sea, we dumped it all in the sea. And that was it, yeah, right, so.
So that told you how.
But England was a beautiful little country, what we've seen of it. And England, of course, took a devastating blow from the enemy, and bombs were flying and all that kind of stuff. But in London was banged up to us, and they moved all the children out of London into the country to get them away from the bombs and all that kind of stuff. But they played an awful penalty though during the war period, that's for sure. And while I was over there, we had a big local people come in, and they'd take one or two of us and for a Sunday dinner. And I went to Sunday dinner one day with a couple, and they had 2 children, and 4 children, I guess. 2 of the boys were in the service already. And I went to their home, and he was a butcher. And he had a little shop for where he butchered meat and sold meat. And we went to the table, and we sat down, and he had a little piece that we'd look at like was like a hamburger, and they were going to split it up for what, 6 people. And of course, I had a buddy of mine there at the time went with me over there. Well, we didn't eat any of the meat, but we enjoyed the other things he had. And right outside his window, in his backyard, was a bomb that had not exploded. And they had a big fence around it, and it was waiting for the crew to come in when they got time, because they had a lot of that to do, where they come in and they were able to disengage the bomb and move it out of there. But it was still there, and that was quite an experience. But they were such nice people, and loved to take us in just for a little home life, you know.
So, what was your job and like assignment? I know you were a paratrooper.
Well, that's just part of it, but everybody has this job, but when you're in the service, and only when we're up here, certainly you are. Now, if you are a, well, there's regular rifleman would be a PFC or a or a regular private, and you had corporals who were involved with the squads, and you might have a sergeant that was involved with a buck sergeant who was involved in a section of the platoon. Then you have your platoon sergeant who was the staff sergeant, and that was it. So each buddy had their own job, and sergeants, of course, would direct you as to what you're doing, and you train with them, and you live with them, and that was it. And whatever was the mission was, he got his instructions from the lieutenant, and the lieutenant got his from the captain, and the captain got his from division colonels, and the colonels got it from the general. So it goes right down the line, really.
Yeah.
That was up the line, but it goes down the line.
Yeah.
So you just did whatever you were supposed to do, and you were trained to operate your equipment, your rifle, your bayonet if you had to, which was attached to the rifle, also your if you was in a weapons platoon or a weapons squad, you had mortars and you had machine guns, so everybody had to learn to operate those. We had bazookas, which was used against the tanks, and you could shoot them into areas also. They were good. That was sort of a new weapon in those days.
Yep. So did you see any combat?
Yes, I did.
Mm-hmm. And what battles were you part of?
Well, the Battle of the Bulge was the biggest, probably the most devastating, should I say? No, not devastating, but there's another word for it, and I always forget it. It begins with a D, so I can't remember, but anyway, this is when the Germans had broken through the lines and made it all the way to the coast, almost to Brussels, Belgium, and that was unexpected. It was during a horrid period of the time. It was during December, and it was just terrible because of the fact of the snows, the worst snows they'd had in years, I guess, and cold, and that was really a toughie. And my old 101st Airborne Division had been involved in it. They brought them in from England also, and they were in before us, and they got surrounded at Bastogne, Belgium, and they were surrounded by the Germans, and the Germans told them that they wanted them to surrender because they were never going to get out. Well, this was one of our missions eventually was to break through and relieve them, and so that we get the troops, get the German guys out of there eventually. So, and eventually that happened, and you know, it's a very oddity that happened with us. We had made our two or three missions and battles, and we came back, and we were living actually in large, big foxholes that the Germans had built before, and they were nice, and we covered them over with big pine branches to keep them warm. But anyway, gosh, I've lost my train of thought here, but where was I? We were.
We were talking about the battle. You're talking about.
Talking about the 101st Division. Remember now, our company was E Company, 193rd Regiment of the 17th Airborne. And when we went on outpost, our company was placed on outpost that night after one of our big involvements, and we went on outpost, and on our right flank was Company E of the 327th Infantry Division. And we, of course, went over there that night, Lindsay and myself and a couple other guys, and Turner, and we went over to visit them. We walked over, but we found, I think, 2 people that we knew when we were in the 101st Division. But how oddity to be that close and to be able to see the same company, E Company, which we came out of to train the E Company of the 193rd, and to be next to them. So that was quite an experience.
Were there many casualties in your unit?
Oh, yes, there was. Well, we had a complement of 239 men in our company. And we went in to a battle, we'd been in previous smaller type things, clearing things out and that kind of thing before we came into the Bastogne area. And we ended up this one night, after this one big battle we had out of that 239 soldiers, troops, we took an account. We had 38 or 39 that showed up that night. Finally to get together the company CP, and that's a lot of people. That's probably around 200 of our guys were either killed or casualties. I think I could count them up. I had record of them all. We might ended up with, I think, 11 killed that day, and the balance were casualties. And some of those casualties were guys that had gotten frozen feet because of the cold. And that was very, very bad. And Germans got them too, they all did. And so, but we took prisoners and sent them back to the division. And but anyway, that was just one of our things. Battle is an awful thing. You don't know what's going to happen, and you don't know what's going on really. But instead, you just keep moving on if you can, unless you get stopped. But yes, those are memorable times there. But I guess to hear bullets flying over your face and popping here and there and there, and artillery pieces dropping behind you. You playing tank. We Americans couldn't get our tanks to move in the snow. The Germans were able to. And it's funny that we were under the command of General Patton, his Third Army. And after this was all over, these first 2 or 3 engagements that we had, someone said he was going to fire our general, General Miley, because he was unhappy, didn't do his duty. Well, anyway, then we found later on that, and he admitted that later on he was sorry he had made that decision, but there were 2 German Panzer divisions that had been back in R&R and had come up front to be involved in this particular thing. So he said, well, that he kept General Miley on board.
Did you have an opportunity to see him from a distance during a battle, General Patton, at some point in time?
See who?
Patton. Didn't you see him from a distance at one time?
I think yeah, we had an occasion where my friend Tony, you might have met him, Tony Heigl, and his wife Betty. Well, Tony was put on guard duty. This is a funny thing, really. He was put on guard duty when we were moving up one time, and he stayed there for 3 days. And I think Patton came along and happened to drive by, and he stopped and he says, "Soldier, what are you doing here?" because we had moved on, you know. And Tony says, well, nobody ever relieved me. And he, you know, and that was funny. And you guys met him. Everybody's met Tony. Well, of course, he's passed on now, but Tony he could never live that down.
No,
he got back to the company then, and it was all right. And he got wounded and went sent back to the States later. But that was Tony was the funny guy. Tony and his buddy, he was a BAR man. That's a Browning automatic rifle, and there was two of them. And him and the guy by the name of Sutton, they were in the squad together, and they went through the war together, and they were always getting into trouble, but they were real nice guys. And
what type of trouble did they
both
get?
of them got wounded in that one big day that we had when we were
The battle you were talking about.
right. Mm-hmm.
What type of trouble did they get into? Do you remember any stories about anything they
did all kinds of things. They'd sometimes come in late, be away for half a day, or
did you have a curfew
they
or
wouldn't do something right or something wrong. They'd always end up. We were in North Carolina then, and it was before we went overseas, and they would come in, and the Lieutenant Christensen, who you met, you did too. He patted this little guy on the head. He said, "Boy, what a little good guy this is." And they made him dig 6 by 6s, 6 foot by 6 foot. Throw it out and say, "Got it? Okay, we're done, Lieutenant." Yeah, well, then let's fill it up. So they'd have to go out and fill it back up.
So that was their punishment?
That was funny. That was funny. They said, "Oh, what do you thought we were going to use something up front?" But anyway, that was the story. Okay.
Tell us about you were telling me the story just yesterday about when you got into Belgium, and I'm assuming it was before the Battle of the Bulge, and that you had met the woman you had met that gave you the medal. Tell Bryce the story about that.
What?
When you got into Belgium and you went to the little, you ended up meeting that woman at the cafe.
Oh.
Tell Bryce about that.
Oh, well,
tell
when we were in
Bryce that
Belgium,
story.
right. In fact, we were in a, what was it? Some kind of I guess they thought it was a pig pen, but it really wasn't. It was more like a chicken place, but they'd cleaned it out. The Germans had been in there before, and we bunked down in there. And that night, we were pulled back from the line, and Sergeant Lindsay and Sergeant said, "I want to go into town." He says, there was a little village. It was 2 or 3 little places in there, We went into town, and we met. He went out, bundled around. We went, and we probably was in there and was able to have a beer or whatever it was. And anyway, he got moved around a little bit, and I was left alone with, and this older lady was in the little cafe where we were at, and we sit down and she could talk a little English, but not much. And she was telling me about what happened to her 2 sons had been killed fighting the war. And, but anyway, I don't know how she got attached to me, but anyway, she told me, she says, she gave me this medal, and I still got it and carried it through. And she says, this will keep you safe. And by golly, it did, So I've always never knew her name, but I don't even remember the town that we were in, where we were. But it's just one of those things that happened that was a nice thing to happen. To know somebody that considered that had lost 2 sons in her battle, and they were living in a little town that had been blown up pretty badly, not too badly, but not like some of them.
So, were you awarded any other medals?
Well, medals are medals. I guess you'd have been the routine things. You get the routine. When I was over there, we had an ETO medal, a European Theater Operation medal, that you were there, and if you were in any major battles, why, you were allowed to put a star on them. So I got 2 stars on mine, and one of them was from the Rhineland battle, and one was from the Ardennes. The Ardennes, again, reversible. So, then we had one in there for Central Europe, which was, they called that one instead of Germany.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
yes, but then, what else? I was awarded a Bronze Star. I don't know what for, but that's what they claim. Anyway, I got it. And it was, what do they call it? Some kind of meritorious, I don't know, service.
So.
And they had other medals. The Good Conduct Medal, that was a good one. If you were in good conduct, then you always got a good conduct. If you didn't get into trouble. Okay.
What was the one the one thing you always talked about that you were most proud of, though? What badge did you get that you were most proud of? Tell Bryce about that.
I was awarded the Combat Infantryman's Badge, and that represents the fact that you were face to face with the enemy on the ground, on the ground, period. And I guess it's a pretty prestigious thing to wear. I mean, if you've been in combat,
Yeah.
it represents that you were in combat, and that was the reason you were. You're entitled to wear that. And it means that you've seen battle back and forth, which means firing your weapons and what needed to be done.
So, how did you stay in touch with your family during the war?
Well, by mail mostly. You could phone, but it was hard to get into a phone because wherever you were in the States, even you had a hard time getting long distance. In those days, it isn't like it is today. You had to call an operator, and the operator had to put you through. Today, it's all automatic. You know.
Yeah.
You can just dial a number, or if you know it, or if you need help, you get it from them. But generally speaking, mail was it. Wrote a lot of letters back and forth to your loved ones and family and what have you. When we went overseas, they had something that they devised. It's called a V-mail, like V in victory. And it was a small version. It was a small thing, and it wanted to reduce the amount of paper that was flowing back to the States. But the mail came through. My God, you got it. You might get 4 or 5 letters at a time, but you'd get it because you'd have your mother might write you, your wife might, friends might, your aunts and uncles, cousins, sisters, what have you. They'd all write you letters, you know, and that was awful nice.
Yeah.
So V-mail and regular mail and phone. And when you're overseas, it was just hard to get the phone because it's just hard.
So,
And you had to be in the right place. You couldn't be out in the battle.
So is that how you found out about, like my grandma, obviously, she's, is that how you found out she was born?
Yeah, well, we had gotten married during the war when I was in the 17th, first 17th Airborne Division, and then I went overseas, and well, she came down to camp and times and visited with other women with their husbands, and yes, my daughter was born in January of 1945, and I didn't find out until March of 45, because I had been in battle, and then I was removed back. I went into the back from Belgium, back, and ended up in hospitals back in Riek Hospital and also Paris, and then eventually into Le Havre, which is the coast of France, and then a ship over the channel and a train into a hospital in Birmingham, England, and that's where I stayed until I was ready to go back again. And that was it. And one nice thing about was that you got out of the war for a little while, And then, also, before you left, we were about ready to come back, boy, I made a trip to and they said, I said, you get 5 days, you can go wherever you want, you know. Well, that time they said, well, where do you suggest? And they said, well, if you wanna go to any place, go to where Hitler and his German troops and bombs left alone, and that was in Edinburgh, Scotland. So I took a train up through the borders up to Edinburgh and spent 5 days up there, and that was quite a trip. And it was a beautiful place, really. It was one place that had not been bombed. So and then come back, and then eventually went back over to the continent again, and moved back up in with the outfit, and that was it.
So what was the food like?
Oh, the food overall, we were very fortunate. We're still very fortunate. We always had enough food, and always, it wasn't bad. We had cooks in our division, and originally we had in our own, each company cooks, but then eventually they combined it into battalions. See, it went from company to battalion to regiment, and then division. But yes, we had some pretty good cooks. In fact, we were pretty good friends with some of them guys too. We had a couple guys. One of the guys that was in a cook in our outfit, he ended up becoming a baker, and he came back and had a string of bakeries in Tennessee.